What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Aumatma, host of Egg Meets Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meets Sperm. We have a special treat for you today. I am talking to a couple from Austria, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and share a little bit about their journey that they've been on so far in their hope to become parents.
Hi, my name is Denise, and I'm 37 years old, a teacher here in Austria, and we've been trying to conceive for almost 2 years now. Had one cycle of IVF, and but we'll get to that later.
Yes, we will.
My name is Bernard, and I'm in the last 2 years, I took the Fertility to raise the amount of sperms. And that's all what I do from my side.
Awesome. Well, welcome. I'm excited to talk to both of you today. We're going to dive into a little bit more about what this journey has been like for you, as well as your hormones and kind of the technical stuff, so we can break it down and figure out what would be the best way to support you. So let's get started. So you have been on this journey for about 2 years. Denise, tell me a little bit more about what this has been like for you and what you feel like is the struggle and maybe what's not being paid attention to.
I guess we started because I kept telling myself that I'm getting old and all my friends are having babies at this time. I was 35 when we started. That's when you hear all the bad news. And so I didn't wait long until I went to my OBGYN to get everything tested. I only waited 3 or 4 months, where all my friends thought that's early. And I'm a tracker. I like to track things. I write down the numbers of the electricity we use. I track everything. So for me, it was natural to track my cycle, track the temperature, doing the ovulation strips and everything. So I was waiting each month. And each month was a little disappointment.
Yeah.
And also the doctor told me my prolactin is too high. And I've been taking medication for lowering the prolactin for almost 2 years now. But it didn't help with conception so far. And so it's been a struggle. We started artificial insemination, I think you call it in English, for 2 cycles at the beginning of this year. And then I was getting impatient and made an IVF cycle happen in the same month, 2 weeks before our wedding. And I thought that's a good idea.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was not a good idea.
No, They should have told you that would have been a really bad idea.
They should have told me.
Yeah.
Should have told me.
Gosh. Oh, well, wow.
We're married now, yes.
We're married. That's good. You made it to the wedding, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Do you remember what your prolactin levels are?
Most of the time, they were around 50.
Okay.
And one time it was above 100. And so I got tested for a prolactinoma, which is a benign tumor in the brain.
Yeah, you don't have it.
I don't have one. I was glad about, but still I have no reason for the high prolactin except my thyroid, low functioning thyroid. But I was on medication for that the whole time. So I haven't found out yet.
So do you know your TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone, at all?
As long as I'm on medication, it is below 2, but I've stopped medication now for the past month. And I've got tested a week ago, and now it's 3.5, which is the upper normal range here in Austria, which I know is already borderline not good.
Yeah.
But I thought maybe because I'm eating very healthy at the moment, I'll give it another month or two to maybe kickstart it and massage it and visualize it and eating healthy food only. Maybe I thought that would help.
Yeah. So I like to see the TSH below 1.5 for fertility. It's a very bit high for our comfort. And TSH or thyroid dysfunction could raise prolactin levels. So that would be a normal response, but probably wouldn't raise it this much. So prolactin, if the average is around 50, that's still a little too high to correlate to thyroid. So I'm already thinking what else could be going on that's raising your prolactin levels, because it may not just be your thyroid's fault.
Researching all the time what could trigger high prolactin, and I find a list of medications I don't take, stress, which I believe I don't have.
Well, you said you're a teacher, so how are your stress levels?
I only work part-time, so only 4 days a week, a couple of hours. It's not bad.
Okay. Yeah. And
I leave all the work at work. I don't take any work home.
Good. Yeah, that's great. And do you enjoy it? You
Very
like working
much.
with children?
It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so that sounds good. The other thing that I think about when people have high prolactin levels are actually neurotransmitters. So if we were working together, the first thing that would be on my list to test would be neurotransmitter metabolites in urine to see the levels of dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Those would be the core ones. And then cortisol, which is not really a neurotransmitter, it's an adrenal hormone, but often it's on similar tests. So they just get grouped together. And cortisol could be high from previous stress. So we might say, like, at this moment in time, life is good. You're not that stressed. But for 15 years in your childhood, you had high levels of stress, or whenever it was that you were super stressed out, that could still be playing a role in your hormones. So we'd want to test just to know what's happening there, but I would really connect prolactin to potential neurotransmitters. So that would be our first, digging under the surface to try to figure out what's happening.
But then would you regulate those factors with medication, or is there a way, would you say, oh, you have to leave out the caffeine or another type of food, or how do you?
It depends on the neurotransmitter. So if often I would say prolactin correlates to dopamine deficiency, in that case, there are herbs that can help support dopamine. So generally would use natural compounds, herbs or supplements to try and regulate the neurotransmitters that are out of balance. And then norepinephrine and epinephrine get released every time we drink coffee. So if they were high, then I would say, okay, maybe we should consider cutting back on coffee if you drink a lot of it. But if you're drinking a cup a day, it's generally not the case. So it should be fine.
Okay, so would have to get those areas tested.
Right. Yeah. So we can just make a note of that's our first thing. Let's figure out what else. Tell me more. So you did the 2 years, you had your IVF cycle before getting married. And what happened with the IVF cycle?
Well, I read about it that IVF mostly works for women who feel positive about it and who also stick with it. And most of the time, doctors say, yes, most women would get pregnant if they had just done another cycle. But I found it very invasive. To me, it was you get sent to a new doctor every time, so you never establish a personal connection. And it's not very personal. And then people tell you, sorry, there's only one follicle. So we don't even know if there's an egg in there. We will have to do the punctuation or puncture. And usually you would be asleep. Anesthetics.
Yeah.
Anesthetics. But it's only one, so we can do it while you're awake. And then I said, well, yes, okay, let's do it. But for me, just being at the OBGYN and having somebody poke around inside of you is invasive. Yeah. So being it actually really painful, it made me cry a lot. Right. It was really hard.
It's traumatic. Yeah.
It's traumatic. Yeah. And then they said, you can just call the next day to find out if the egg was any good. And they said, no, it immediately collapsed. It's just the lab guy you call. And he said, yeah, no, that egg is just.
So did they only harvested one egg?
Yes.
Okay. So already I'm thinking of other things. So for those of you listening in, your AMH was 1.21, which is actually not bad. That's a really good AMH. So with an AMH of 1.21 at 37, I would say they should have retrieved like 7 to 10 eggs. The fact that they only got one means that potentially their hormones weren't dialed in to the point of getting how many follicles they should have gotten from that cycle.
I got a lot of stimulation and injections.
Yeah.
And they said, well, it can just happen and it can be fine in the next month. I went back next month just to get checked.
Yeah.
And I had 2 follicles without stimulation.
Yeah. So I feel like something happened there that was part of the IVF cycle that just doesn't sound right. I'm not going to say a lot because I'm not the IVF doctor, but I would definitely just ask more questions of that doctor of like, what do you think happened that only had resulted in one egg or one follicle?
Yeah, I think we asked that question. Well, they only said that happens sometimes, and it doesn't mean we should raise the amount of stimulation. It could just go totally in a different direction the following month. They just recommended to do the 3 or 4 cycles that you get here in this country.
Right. Yeah. And to be fair, I've heard a lot of reproductive endocrinologists say that the very first cycle is a test cycle. So they're just testing out their protocol to see if it's the right one for you and if it's going to work, it's going to result in the outcomes that we want. And if not, then at least in the US, a lot of REs will change the protocol to see how can we get more follicles. And for some people, it's not that you need more stimulation, you actually need less stimulation. So at least with the docs that I communicate with a lot here, it's a process of really dialing in the medications for each person. I don't know if they do that in Austria, but if you were to go back that route, which it doesn't sound like you want to, then I would really talk to them about how can they tailor this so it will work better for you next time. And if they're not willing to do any tailoring, then I might consider a second consult with someone different.
Yeah. We don't have many options here. I have the impression it's a very standardized procedure maybe here.
Yeah. And honestly, you are the first person that I'm talking to in Austria. So I don't know what the processes are there. But here, if it was someone here, I would definitely be like, yep, time for a different consult. So that's just to say, on one side, I think your AMH is really good. And theoretically, you should have quite a lot of follicles. It's not like an abundance, like you can wait as many years as you want, but you have a fair number of follicles. So there shouldn't be a concern of like, oh my God, I'm running out of time. This isn't going to work for me.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay, so let's keep going. Let's break this down some more. You have tracked your cycles. You've done L8 strips, temperature tracking. Tell me what your cycles are like.
They are more or less regular, and I consider regular that the app usually tells me 2 or 3 days exact the day when I will have my period. I'm never sure if the ovulation was at the exact time because the LH strips often gave me a different message than the temperature. And then I didn't know which one to believe.
Okay. So on average, your L8 strips, when do they say you're ovulating? What day of the month on average?
I would say on cycle day 12 to 15.
Okay. All right. And then your temperatures, what do they show?
Usually a little bit later. So maybe it was day 12, the LH strip, and then 17, the temperature rise.
Okay. So there's a couple of things that could be happening there. High prolactin will throw off your LH and like potentially look as if you're not ovulating, or the LH rises, but egg actually doesn't drop. So that could be part of the problem. The other part of the problem is often when I wish there were a name for this. This is not a real diagnosis in any way, shape, or form, but it explains what I think is happening, which is a sluggish ovary. So it's like the ovary got the message that it should release the follicle, but it's like, and then finally releases the follicle. It's just not as efficiently working as someone who doesn't have that issue and is just like, boop, here it is. And that often what I see on temperature charts is that there will be like a step ladder of temperature rise. So instead of it's low and then the next day it's high and ovulation happen, it will look like a slight increase in temp and another slight increase and another slight increase before it gets to the peak temperature. And that usually, I call it sluggish ovaries. And the way we address it is through hormones. So we want to figure out if estrogen is rising or peaking at the day that it should, which should be around cycle day 10 to 12, it should find its peak. And then that causes an LH surge and that causes ovulation to happen. And often with women that have potentially the sluggish liver, sluggish ovary issue, the estrogen is maybe too high leading up to the LH surge. So it's like not giving a full surge, basically. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So let's talk then, since we're talking about estrogen, let's talk about your hormones. So I see that your estradiol was 186 pg per ml. Those are also US terms. We also use PG per ml here. So 186 is, what have you been told about that level?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Okay. Yeah. And this is really normal here too. Our optimal range for estradiol, if tested on day 3 of your cycle, it should be between 30 and 50. And I would say even 40 and 50 if we want to be more type A personalities about it. Sometimes I try to be type A. But this estradiol at 186 is really, really high. Now, let's confirm, because we asked that these are day 3 hormones. Were these tested on day 3 of your cycle?
I cannot be 100% sure about that.
Okay.
Because I looked through all my papers. Where do I find value for estradiol? And I guess I just took one that I found.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not sure, then we should retest because a lot gets based off of this number. So if we're not totally sure, I would just say consider retesting these hormones on day 3 of your cycle. If they are day 3 hormones, and for the sake of this conversation, we'll just assume that if that were true, then I would say estradiol is crazy high, which means this theory of you're probably not getting estradiol surge because it's already high on day 3. So LH is likely peaking too soon. And that's what's causing the ovary to be this like kind of slow about releasing the egg, if it is even releasing the egg.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one component or one effect of the high estrogen. The other effect of high estrogen is that it's going to overtly suppress FSH. So that means if your estrogen is generally above 70, that's the upper limit of where it can be. After about that hormone signals back to the brain and shuts off the production of FSH. So it looks like your FSH is great. It's 6.3, right? Which is a really good number. But if we actually removed all of this extra estradiol from your system, that FSH would probably be closer to a 12 or so.
And FSH should be low.
FSH should be low. And we want that number to ideally be below 7, which again, yours is 6.3, which is great until we look at the estradiol. Once we look at the estradiol, then we're like, well, it's great, but it's only great because this estrogen's coming and suppressing the FSH. So in that case, when we have this like conundrum, because we see this often, even when we detox estrogen out of the body, the FSH is going to swing and it's going to go crazy high. So we really have to figure out a system to get rid of estrogen slowly. We want to detox it. We just don't want to go super fast. And while we're detoxing, we want to keep the FSH in balance. And the way to do that is usually through supporting the adrenals. So often giving herbs for adrenal support will help to keep the FSH even keel while we're getting rid of the estrogen. And that process can take 3 to 4 months, but it's better to take as long as we need to get rid of it slowly rather than getting rid of it super fast. And then your FSH swings to a not good level, which then negatively impacts the quality of the egg.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So far we've broken down a few different things. We have a good amount of information from your cycle tracking. If you are keeping temperature charts and we decide to work together, we can certainly look at all of your temperature charts from before and try to see if there's any other patterns that we should be concerned about.
Well, after the IVF, I stopped all the tracking and I actually also stopped all the trying. We also stopped having baby making sex. I said, let's look anymore and time anything. And if we're not in the mood, we're not in the mood. I started to tell myself I'm not old. I read some books about older moms, above 40. So I keep telling myself now it's going to be okay. And I don't have to pressure myself. Because everybody gave me that advice. Once you stop trying, which is the least helpful advice I've ever heard in the world, because how do you stop trying? But we decided after the IVF, that gave me the motivation to stop trying a little bit.
So how long has it been that you haven't been, quote unquote, trying?
The wedding was at the end of April. Okay. So around
just
that
a short amount of time.
We started to eat healthy, cut out all processed food, grains and dairy, and almost no sugar, and almost no alcohol, no caffeine. So mostly meat, fish, vegetables, nuts and seeds, kind of paleo approach, because that's what we read everywhere. And he's doing it 80%.
Awesome. I always say you don't need to do 100%. Is perfect.
He's missing the carbs.
Well, okay. So that's a good conversation to have next. So in terms of diet, complex unprocessed carbs are actually essential to fertility, especially for women. So you need to eat the carbs. Don't do paleo. Don't do keto. It's a bad idea. He's like, I like this doctor. Let's keep her. So if you want to take it a step further, what you could do is focus on protein for the breakfast and lunch, or the first early part of the day meals. And then for dinner, really focus on the complex carbs. You can do a baked potato. You can do rice, brown rice, quinoa, millet. It doesn't have to be gluten, but you can do grains. You can also do lentils and beans. Those are really great complex carbs. Those help to build progesterone. So when we talk about the equation of estrogen to progesterone, really we want the right hormones at the right times. And progesterone needs to be present for 2 weeks in order to really sustain or to really set you up in a fertile state to be able to get pregnant and then stay pregnant. So the complex carbs will help a lot.
Okay. Let's do that.
Unprocessed. Sorry, what did you say?
He supports me.
Awesome. Good. So I think we have some ideas. We can talk a little bit about this. You said that you haven't been trying and you stopped doing all the things, which is, in one sense, it's fine. It's okay to take breaks. On the other side, what I see kind of blaringly is the estradiol, the prolactin, and the TSH are like kind of in my face as like things that are needing attention quickly or sooner rather than later to really even get you to the point of, okay, now we don't have to try. Does that make sense?
Yes. I just have one question because I've been on thyroid medication for so long and I know what they're supposed to be good for.
Yeah.
But I always feel tired and always sluggish. So I could totally understand my ovary if it's sluggish too. Because I'm such a couch potato and every step feels like too much work.
Yeah.
So I just decided to, because I'm doing a detox, I was swallowing, 50 supplements each day. And I just decided to cut it all out for a couple of months, maybe.
Yeah.
Get tested every month. I still have no energy.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, now everybody will tell me because I'm not taking thyroid medication.
Right.
But I'm curious if anything will get better if I eat healthy and try to live healthy and de-stress and do everything. Or would you recommend certain medication or herbs right now and get tested every month?
Well, so I would say that part A would be really double down on this like pattern of eating that I suggested, the protein, carbs, and then you eat vegetables at every single meal, 2 to 3 servings per meal. So try to double down on that. And usually in about 2 weeks, you should see or notice that you're waking up with more energy. If you are, that's a sign that you're moving in the right direction. If you're not, then it's a sign that maybe we need to take more steps than just food. The second piece is to think about your sleep. So do you feel like you're getting good quality restorative sleep?
I track my sleep and I try to go to bed around 10, but many times I wake up at some point in the night and I can't fall back to sleep.
Okay.
For an hour or longer.
Yeah.
I started listening to podcasts.
That's good. It's better than TV.
Yeah.
But so how long do you end up staying awake?
An hour.
An hour. Okay. And then when you wake up in the morning, do you feel rested?
Most of the time I do.
Okay. And then on average during the day, how much energy on a scale of 1 to 10 do you feel like you have?
I feel I'm very bubbly at work, which is usually until noon. And when I get home, I might have the energy to cook and then I lay down. Mm-hmm. And also walking the dog feels like a chore. It's like, oh, steep. It's not that steep, but to me it feels like an eternity.
So when your body is in this place of like, you don't feel super vibrant, right? You don't feel like you used to probably 10 years, 15 years ago. When you feel tired a lot or you feel sluggish a lot, that is essentially in a way your body saying to your brain, like, I can't imagine having a child right now because I don't have energy for myself. So you really have to think about fertility then being this outpouring of vitality. So you have to feel vital. It has to just like ooze out of you in order to like flow to that fertile energy. So yeah, I think a good starting point is the food. I'm not suggesting this because I'm not your doctor, but you could look into melatonin. That could be a good thing for you.
To get it checked or to take it?
To take it.
To take it, yes.
Yeah, look into it. I remember I didn't tell you. There is also something that I have been using called magnesium threonate in combination with the melatonin, and it works really, really well to help get to like deeper levels of sleep. Mm. So magnesium threonate, it's a specific kind of magnesium. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, so it helps to relax the mind enough to like sleep. It's awesome. I've been testing it out on myself because I'm like, do I believe the hype? I don't often believe the hype. So I have to try it. And then if it works, I'm like, oh, it's so good. So think about that as a potential way to really optimize your sleep as a foundation of fertility. If you sleep better, you have more energy during the day, you automatically are impacting your fertility. And then as far as the thyroid mumbo jumbo, there are several nutrients that are essential for thyroid. And there's a nutrient analysis that we often do with people to figure out if they have deficiencies that are contributing to their inability to get pregnant. So in your case, the nutrients that I was thinking of are B vitamins, selenium, tyrosine, magnesium, probably choline and inositol. And then there's a whole ton of antioxidants that could be useful. I am not a believer that every fertility person needs to be on CoQ10 and alpha lipoic acid and acetyl L-carnitine. Like there's a million of them, but everyone doesn't need them. And for us, what we found to be the most beneficial is actually doing the test and then tailoring it so that we can get exactly the right nutrients at the right doses, where we don't have to focus so much on whether or not you're able to get good quality stuff into your body in the levels that you need.
And the herbs that you mentioned that really do have an effect, is that something ordinary people can find out online? If I know I have high estrogen, are there just typical herbs to lower estrogen?
No. So in terms of food, you can do that through broccoli sprouts, alfalfa sprouts, and then broccoli, cauliflower, kale. The whole family of brassicas will help to keep estrogen in balance. As far as herbs or supplements go for estrogen, again, you've probably heard the theme by now, but I really believe in testing before giving stuff, because I've seen a lot of people mess their bodies up by just taking random stuff that they found on Google. So with estrogen in particular, there's a thing called a dried urine test. So they send you a bunch of strips, you pee on them, you send it back to the lab. They tell us what your hormones are doing, and we can see the breakdown of estrogen. They're called estrogen metabolites. And there's 3 phases of estrogen detoxification. So a lot of supplements that are popular online for estrogen detox only focus on phase 1 detoxification. When you upregulate phase 1, but you don't have phase 2 and phase 3 working properly, you create a jam where you've now just upregulated something that doesn't have a way out of the body. So you actually create more inflammation and more harm very quickly by only supporting phase 1. Mm-hmm. So the way that we do it is test first, then we know, is it phase 1 that's the issue, phase 2, or phase 3? If depending on which phase it is, we can get really targeted about which supplements are going to support the detoxification of those phases.
But do you think I could just ask my OBGYN here that this is what I want to do? And can I just make them spend the time with me?
No, I really doubt it. There's not even like a lot of these tests that I'm talking about are, unfortunately, they're called functional tests, which mean they're not diagnosing anything. They're just supporting your body to function better. And unfortunately, a lot of conventionally trained doctors know nothing about functional medicine. So you really have to have a provider that is well versed with all of these things. And these tests are available in Europe. So it's not the availability that's the issue. It's usually the provider, whether or not they know how to support you.
And there is no universal database of providers that are functionally trained. Is that, if there is nobody in my area, I mean, it would work long distance as well, you said?
Yeah, we coach people all over. So yes, we could totally do that. And we can connect you with labs locally that can send you the kits. So we have all the connections in Europe. It's essentially like we figured out a lot of the missing pieces that I see. Now it's filling the gaps with the functional analyses to figure out what else. Let's get to the root of this. And then once we dial all of that in, we can say, okay, now we figured out why the estrogen's not getting out of the body. Here's what we need to do for that. Why is the thyroid doesn't have the key nutrients it needs? Let's make sure that it has its nutrients. And then prolactin, like I said, the neurotransmitters will really help to figure out if you have a deficiency of some of the neurotransmitters. That's why the prolactin is elevated. So figuring all of that.
Yeah. So we would figure it out while I'm not taking the medication to lower the prolactin, right?
Right. Could you take the medication to lower prolactin? Sure. But I don't think you need to. I think you're in this very middle range where I would say could probably be lowered with the herbs and supplements, but we want to make sure that it's going to support the right reason why it's high. All right. And we haven't heard anything from hubby. So sorry. Hopefully this was we dialed it all in, right? Like you have some insights. How were the sperm? Let's talk about that.
I think the first spermiogram was about 85 million. And I think that the details, I don't know really. But then we raised it with some supplements and it was about 98 million. And all the levels were in
the numbers,
okay stuff.
The amount was okay. And two other factors were normal. I think the morphology and speed was quite okay. And the only problem, I think, was motility, which was it motility?
In the first?
In the first one, it was below 32%. I think it was 28%. And they said it should be above 32. And then the second one we did was 34.
Okay.
After a couple of months of a lot of supplements.
Okay.
And then we didn't test it anymore.
Okay. And how long ago was that?
With the supplements?
I would say the second test was about almost a year ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So in general, you want to test once a year the sperm just to make sure that they're still in a good place. It's possible that they've continued improving. So that is a good thing. And I would say I aim for motility to be above 50% and morphology above 10%. So if it's not quite there yet, then keep supplementing. It sounds like the supplements are probably working. So keep going to try and get the sperm to a better level. And then these tests, I would consider looking into blood sugar, insulin, liver enzymes, cholesterol or lipid panel, and homocysteine levels. Those are all pretty important in men. And even though they can be abnormal without affecting the sperm at all. So the sperm might look great, but if any of these are abnormal, they're going to have a negative impact on ability to conceive and ability to stay pregnant. So we want to make sure once you get pregnant, you can stay pregnant, right? We want to have a healthy baby. So we usually suggest doing that testing up front. Your general doctor can probably order all of those tests, and you want to just be ahead of the curve on it. But it sounds like things are moving in the right direction. Just retest the sperm, get the other test, and then see where things are at.
So would that be like couple coaching? Would you look at both our statistics?
Yep, exactly. So almost all of the people, unless they're solo moms by choice, we're always working with couples. So we want to make sure that we look at everything. Sometimes we look at the guy's side and we're like, hey, things are pretty good. You can come to the sessions or you don't. That's fine. And then sometimes the guys were told that they have amazing sperm and we look at it and we're like, yeah, there's a bit of work for us to do. In that case, they really need to show up for all of the sessions. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that this was useful for you. And for those of you listening it at home, make sure to tune in for the rest of the week for tips coming from me this week about what you can do to support your fertility. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.